All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman. And today is Crossover Thursday, where I will be joined by Locked On Lions host Matt Dery to preview this Week 16 matchup between the Atlanta Falcons and Detroit Lions, as well as talk about which Atlanta Falcons made the Pro Bowl and which didn't.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, aka Clint. You'll get that reference a little bit later. But I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for many years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, writing weekly content at the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. And of course, the host of this preeminent Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode, of course, is a crossover Thursday, in which later in the episode, I will be joined by Matt Dery, the host of the Locked On Lions, as we do every Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where the two Locked On hosts, or sometimes three, the 49ers guys weren't necessarily kind to me last week in our little three-way, but this time it's just the two of us, and Matt and I can be intimate and caring for one another as we preview this Week 16 matchup between the Atlanta Falcons and Detroit Lions. And full disclosure, we recorded that a little bit earlier in the day before the Pro Bowl announcements were officially made, and that's really where we're going to be kicking off today's episode, talking about the Falcon players that did make the Pro Bowl and one in particular that did not make the Pro Bowl as a snub. But before we get into all of that, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify, as well as now free and available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel if you haven't. And when you do, make sure you give us that thumbs up. Make sure you leave a comment and all that stuff. So jumping into the Pro Bowl conversation, two Falcon players made the Pro Bowl. Rookie tight end Kyle Pitts and long snapper Josh Harris. Two of the six players that on last week's episode I outlined my six Falcon players that I voted for on my Pro Bowl ballot. And Pitts and Harris were two of them. The other four, in case you're wondering, were Cordarrelle Patterson, Chris Lindstrom, AJ Terrell, Younghoe Koo. Patterson did make it as a first alternate, as a return specialist behind Jakeem Grant, who is the NFC's representative for that return specialist position of Chicago. We don't know Chris Lindstrom's status. He apparently did not make it as any alternate, at least based off of the initial information released about which Falcons were alternates. AJ Terrell was a fourth alternate, more on that in a bit, and Younghoe Koo was a second alternate at that kicker position. All other alternates included Grady Jarrett, fourth alternate at the defensive tackle position, and fullback Keith Smith being a second alternate there. So, Pitts obviously very deserving of going to the Pro Bowl, on pace to be the second rookie tight end in NFL history to eclipse 1,000 yards in his first NFL season. Of course, Mike Ditka 50 years ago finished with the record 1,076 yards back in 1961. Pitts is currently on pace for 1,028. So he needs a little bit of a big game in these last 3 weeks if he's going to pass Ditka, but certainly is already, I think, maybe like 50 yards away from passing Jeremy Shockey, who's number 2 on that list at like 890 something. So Pitts will be joining George Kittle, who we just saw last week in the Falcons 49ers game, as the two tight ends on that NFC squad. Josh Harris, as I mentioned on last week's episode, talking about my Pro Bowl ballot, is Pro Football Focus's highest graded long snapper this season, and that's likely due to his impact in coverage, particularly as he is, I believe, the long snapper with the most special teams tackles with 6, and that also puts him second on the Falcons special teams unit with 6 special teams tackles according to PFF. Richie Grant, by the way, is leading the team with 7 tackles. The other players, I get why they didn't necessarily make it, because I don't necessarily know if they were the top option at their respective positions, like those other guys. Pitts and Harris could have been, or at least Pitts second behind Kittle. But the one player that is a true snub in my eyes is, of course, AJ Terrell. He's Pro Football Focus, his highest graded corner this season. The players that made it were Trevon Diggs out of Dallas, Darius Slay out of Philadelphia, Marshawn Lattimore out of New Orleans, and Jalen Ramsey with the Rams. And 3 of those 4 players I feel like are well deserving. I put Lattimore and Jalen Ramsey on my ballot. I think I wound up bumping Darius Slay at the end on my ballot, but he was definitely borderline. And I get why Trevon Diggs made it, because he's got a ridiculous 10 interceptions. And of course, that's going to be eye popping. He plays for the Cowboys. They're going to stuff the ballot for him. They're a very popular team, all that sort of stuff. So it's not surprising to me that AJ Terrell did not make it, when the results earlier this week indicated that he wasn't even in the top 10 in the fan voting. Sort of kind of signaled to you that unless the coaches and players, because the fan votes is 1/3 of the process and coaches and players are the other 2/3 of the process, unless the coaches and players went really hard for AJ Terrell, that he was, potentially going to be, snubbed in this situation. But him being the 4th alternate is a little surprising that he didn't wind up being a little bit higher than that when all is said and done. I don't know all the alternates, but I did see some reports that Stephon Gilmore was up there, Rasul Douglas and Byron Murphy were other alternates at that cornerback position for the NFC squad. And certainly Gilmore and Douglas have played really well. Murphy's had a really solid season. I don't know if he's had a better season than AJ Terrell. And that's because, as I said, Pro Football Focus has AJ Terrell as our highest graded corner in the NFL. He's number 1 in coverage grade. He's number 1 in completion percentage allowed, or lowest completion percentage allowed. He's number 1 in yards allowed per reception. He's number 3 in their forced incompletion percentage metric, number 2 in the NFC. And that forced incompletion is basically factoring in both pass breakups, interceptions, and tight coverage when it leads to an incompletion. So that's based off of the number of targets. So he's number 2 in the NFC behind Marshawn Lattimore. He's number 4 in pass breakups overall, number 3 overall in the NFC, number 3 in passer rating allowed, number 1 in the NFC, number 7 in snaps per target, number 2 in the NFC. And that snaps per target basically means how many snaps do you go before a quarterback throws at you, and being very high on that metric means that quarterbacks are avoiding you at all costs. And he's number 2 in the NFC and number 2 in snaps per reception, which is the same thing, where it's how many snaps do you go before you give up a reception. Number 2 in the NFL, number 1 in the NFC in that metric. So clearly AJ Terrell across a multitude of categories has been lights out, as we talk later with Matt Dery in this crossover Thursday, talking about basically his side of the field being a no-fly zone. I think it's certainly a pretty big snub. Not too upset about any of the other players. I felt like, Patterson had a chance to make it, but, wasn't necessarily a lot. Chris Lindstrom was going to be hard pressed to crack the top 3. I think I was a little surprised that Brandon Scherf made it. But it is what it is. And Younghoe Koo, didn't have necessarily the gaudy points production that you typically look for in kickers and whatever the case may be. And Keith Smith was deserving of being, potentially the second or third highest voted fullback in the NFC, given that there's like basically 5 NFC fullbacks. So he's definitely up there. And Grady Jarrett, while he's had a down season, understandably not going to be particularly high. And that was the case. But AJ Terrell, definitely a snub, but already indicated, from a report from Josh Kendall of The Athletic, that, it's just, he's going to use it as motivation next year, and that's going to be something that he's going to continue to work on. So I'm sure people will react. It's not surprising that AJ Terrell got snubbed. I'm sure people will be using this as fuel to the fire of no one respects us and no one cares about Atlanta, and this is just proof that the league is out to get us, as fans are wont to do. But it was one of those situations where it's unfortunately that he did not get that Pro Bowl bid. But we all know secretly in our hearts that he is one of the best corners in the NFL, and if not the best corner in the NFL. And that's where we'll leave the Pro Bowl conversation, and we'll continue today's Locked On Falcons, getting into that crossover Thursday as we talk with Matt Dery of the Locked On Lions to preview this Lions team as well as this Week 16 matchup. And that is what we're going to get into as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast. But this is the time of year where fantasy playoffs are going on, and I was in the fantasy playoffs in 3 of my leagues. I'm out of the fantasy playoffs in 2 of those 3 leagues. The one league that I'm still in, I had a bye week, so that's why I'm still in it. And it's tough this time of year because no one likes to lose, and daily fantasy sports are really kind of a losing proposition. And that's why Stat Hero, with their sort of never before seen innovation, is the first of its kind daily fantasy sports platform where it's you versus the house in a head-to-head fantasy matchup, winner take all. And the crazy thing about it is Stat Hero is showing you their lineup before you play, and you can basically handpick the team that you want to face one-on-one, and that gives you 4 times the odds to win than traditional fantasy sports do, because you're not competing against thousands of experts and unknown variables. That's the problem with daily fantasy sports, or at least traditional daily fantasy sports, because you never know who or what you're up against. And Stat Hero lets you control your fate. You're in control of the stakes. You decide how much you're going to play for, and Stat Hero has no choice but to take it because they're daring you to beat them. And you can take advantage of this by signing up for free right now at stathero.com/locked-on. And you can use the promo code locked-on when you get there, and you'll get a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/locked-on. And with that promo code locked-on, you'll get a 100% deposit match. stathero.com/locked-on, promo code locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Everyone, it's crossover Thursday here. Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, joined by Matt Dery of Locked On Lions to preview this Week 16 matchup between the Atlanta Falcons and Detroit Lions. Matt, man, this is an interesting matchup because you look over the last month, these are 2 teams that seem to be trending in the right direction, but Detroit's coming off their biggest win of the season against Arizona, and the Falcons are coming off a pretty disappointing loss to the 49ers, in which basically their playoff hopes, what thin playoff hopes they had, are now pretty much gone. So it seems like both teams are going in the right direction, but this most recent week sort of seems like they're going in opposite directions.
Yeah, Aaron, it's been kind of a crazy couple of weeks for the Lions. This is really their best football that they've played in a long time. Last week was a stunner to knock off the Cardinals the way they did, to dominate Arizona the way they did. There's some optimism in Detroit for the first time in years. Maybe the buy-in for Dan Campbell is there, and all of a sudden he's looking good and can coach a little bit, because that just wasn't a win last week against Arizona. That was an ass kicking. And now they hope to have some momentum, question mark on who will start at quarterback. And you take Jared Goff out of the mix and go with either Tim Boyle or David Blau, you're probably asking for trouble. But all of a sudden, this is a game where I think there's some Lions fans, even some naysayers, saying, why can't we win 2 games in a row? And why they beat the Falcons last year, so you never know.
Yeah, well, these Falcons-Lions matchups always seem to come down to that final play, that final possession. So we'll see if this one repeats history in that regard. But you talk about sort of the Lions coming off that big win with the Jared Goff situation, now that he's on COVID and potentially having a backup quarterback. One of the interesting things looking at this Lions team is like looking at this matchup, I'm trying to think, okay, what's a key matchup? But it seems like every week the Lions have key players in and out of the lineup. They don't have any consistency. Is that one of the factors that's been contributing to some of their struggles this year?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when you look at Detroit to start the season in August, if you go back to training camp and the preseason, you say, wow, this is a really bad roster. And it is. Dan Campbell and general manager Brad Holmes inherited a complete mess and a clown show before them from Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia. So you take a bad roster and then you minus off the roster arguably your best defensive player in Romeo Okwara, arguably your top cornerback in Jeffrey Okudah, your best offensive player in Frank Ragnow, Now the TJ Hawkinson, their clear-cut best offensive player after Ragnow, he's out for the year. You take Stafford off that roster. You add Jared Goff, who's a downgrade, and you have a receiver room of no names. The two veterans they brought in at the start of the year, Tyrell Williams and Brashad Perriman, did not work out. Neither are with the team anymore. So you look up and go, all right, well, they got DeAndre Swift. Oh, wait, he's been out the last few weeks. Their fifth string running back, fifth string, Craig Reynolds, is all of a sudden this new savior who's rushed for 100 yards the last 2 weeks. It makes absolutely no sense, but he's been really good. So there's some development. There's some young guys getting there. But all in all, this was and is still about a 4-win football team. I don't know if they'll get to 4. But right now, after what happened last week against Arizona, there's some people seeing some actual progress. Now they just have to add to the roster. They still have too many holes to be a winner for the next. They need a couple more drafts before you can call them a contender.
Yeah, you talk about Craig Reynolds. He had a cup of coffee with the Falcons in 2020, just like Charles Harris,
Yeah.
another player that played for the Falcons. And I remember being very critical of the Falcons trading for Charles Harris because I thought they needed a proven pass rusher at that point in time. And Charles Harris wasn't that guy in Miami, wasn't that guy in Atlanta, but he seems to be that guy in Detroit. Tell me about sort of what you're seeing from him that's led to his sort of recent resurgence.
Well, obviously, it's a former first-round pick that's still pretty young at 26 that can play. The question is who can squeeze the most out of him and get it out of him. And it seems like the Lions have done that. Todd Wash, their defensive line coach, has done a nice job with him. They've kind of moved him to more of a, outside linebacker spot in the 3-4. So he's getting, I think, is being put in the right spots. And he's been very good. He's been getting to the quarterback. He had a huge game last week. Should have had 3 sacks. They only listed him for 2, but he really had 3. He was in the backfield all game. He's had some big games, and he's a guy in a 1-year flyer, a 1-year deal, who will probably get a multi-year deal to stay with Detroit because they need healthy bodies getting to the quarterback. So he's been a pleasant surprise and someone who's finally living up to that first-round billing.
Yeah, the Falcons have struggled with their pass protection this week, and I think that matchup between former teammates now Charles Harris and Jake Matthews is going to be one to watch in this game. You know, obviously the big story with the Lions right now is the status of Jared Goff. Does it seem like losing your starting quarterback, and depending on who winds up playing for him this weekend, it seems like if there is a week where the Lions can maybe compensate for that loss, particularly going up against a struggling Falcons team, it's maybe this week because you have what you talked about, Craig Reynolds having 2 really good games, and you're potentially getting your other running backs, Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, back. How does that sort of figure into their game plan where I would imagine they're going to be focused on running the football?
They are, and even if Jared Goff is playing, they will focus on the run game. The offensive line has done a really nice job the last few weeks. They've blown some people off the ball, whether it's Craig Reynolds, whether it's DeAndre Swift. We're seeing 100-yard games, multiple ones, which we haven't seen since the days of Barry Sanders. I got to be honest with you, Aaron. If Goff doesn't play, and it's up in the air right now, I don't see the Lions winning with Tim Boyle or David Blau. Those guys suck. All right, they're not good. Jared Goff isn't good either, but he's not on the suck level. I think he's really starting to come on and play pretty well. He and Dan Campbell have a nice rapport, but I don't see them winning without Goff. Jared said the other day that he feels fine, but that he just tested positive. So they're obviously going to need a negative test here before the game on Sunday to get him back. There's a chance. There's also a chance he doesn't play. I mean, who knows with this virus and certainly Omicron, but Boyle and Blau are a real big step down, in my opinion. Not that Goff is the second coming of Matt Ryan in his prime or Stafford or Aaron Rodgers here, but they have a nice rapport with Goff. He's starting to get a little comfortable. He's got a really good rapport with Amon-Ra St. Brown, the rookie receiver. So they're building a little bit here, but I think that would be a huge step back to ask Boyle or Blau to win a road game in Atlanta.
Well, we'll see what happens with that. The Falcons have not been particularly good at home, so I think if the Lions have a chance, it may be this week against a Falcons team that struggles to stop the run and has not played particularly well in Mercedes-Benz Stadium this season. But we'll sort of switch sides and have Matt sort of take the helm as we continue today's Locked On crossover Thursday between Locked On Falcons and Locked On Lions. But before we get into all of that, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons or Locked On Lions your first listen each and every day. And of course, both podcasts are free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify. And of course, you can check out Locked On Falcons on YouTube as well. And we know that this matchup is not going to feature two teams poised for the Super Bowl, but that does not mean that you can't find yourself at Super Bowl 56 at SoFi, which is less than 60 days away. And On Location, the official hospitality partner of the NFL, is the only place to score a once-in-a-lifetime Super Bowl ticket and experience package. You can pick your perfect spot at SoFi by selecting your exact seats. You can choose from elite experiences featuring exclusive pregame celebrations where you can meet and greet NFL legends. You can stay at 5-star LA hotels. You can see headliners at musical performances, an open bar, premium open bar. So you know they got the good stuff over there. And of course, you can tailgate with food by the great Wolfgang Puck. Pick your preferred package by visiting onlocationexp.com/SB56 for more information, or search Super Bowl On Location. That's onlocationexp.com/SB56, or search Super Bowl On Location for more info. It's the holiday season, and BetOnline has had you covered all season long and still does, with more odds, props, and lines than ever before as we march towards the NFL and college football playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all sports action, from playoff football to regular season basketball and hockey, boxing, UFC, all the way to your favorite Vegas casino games. BetOnline remains the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Head to the website, the updated desktop or mobile website at betonline.ag, and sign up. And when you do, make sure you use the promo code Locked On. You'll get a 50% welcome bonus. That means if you deposit $200, you get $100 in free money to play with. That's $100 that you can put towards this Falcons Lions game, where the Falcons are favored by 5.5 points. People that are longtime listeners of Locked On Falcons know I do a terrible job picking who's going to cover the spread in a Falcons game. I don't think this line is a great one for the Falcons to cover, but that usually means that the Falcons will do the opposite of what I say and actually cover it. But take advantage of my advice or ignore my advice by going to betonline.ag and take advantage of all the amazing offers available. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Matt Dery, Locked On Lions. Aaron Freeman, Locked On Falcons, the Thursday crossover. Always great to talk to Aaron. We have spoken numerous times, whether it was the Golden Tate's touchdown, not touchdown game, or the Todd Gurley touchdown, not touchdown game. It always seems like it comes down to something, Aaron, like it did a year ago. But where are the Falcons right now? Talk about a mystery team here. 6-8. I thought Matt Ryan got blistered last week by the Niners. That was just an onslaught. And then there's other weeks Atlanta looks really good, but how would you characterize this season so far?
Yeah, the Falcons look really good against bad teams, and no offense to the Lions listeners right now, but the Lions are a bad team, so I expect them to look pretty good this upcoming week on Sunday. But anytime they face a good team, they have looked generally bad outside of the two Tampa Bay games where they have looked at least semi-competitive against one of the better teams in the NFL. But you can probably chalk that up as, being familiar with that team due to it being a divisional game. But whether it's been any other team, like the Falcons, I think have been getting outscored by on average 20 points per game when they have faced a team with a 500 or better record so far this season. So it's been a up and down type of performance. And so you're getting a team that struggles in a lot of areas. They have not necessarily been a great run team. That's changed over the last couple of weeks where they've had a couple of solid games. The passing offense has been down due to some injuries, due to not being able to protect. You don't have your number one weapon in Calvin Ridley in the lineup. Kyle Pitts, while probably on his way to a Pro Bowl season, hasn't necessarily been that consistent, productive playmaker each and every week. They've gotten a lift the last couple of weeks from Russell Gage, who's played really well over the last month. So that's helped them keep their passing game at least decent. And the defense is bad because they can't get any pressure. they can't really stop the run. Although it's been better again over the last couple of weeks, where they've at least gotten some stops, gotten some turnovers, and unfortunately last week they weren't able to take advantage of some of those turnovers that they got. So it's an up and down type of season for the Falcons. There are some positives, but a whole lot of meh.
Aaron, what's the Matt Ryan situation? Every year it seems like I ask you this, but is he back next year? Is he playing well? Like you said, you mentioned the inconsistency. I know he's been the rock and the stability guy there, but at one point or another here, they're going to move on from him, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's been a topic of discussion, much to the chagrin of a certain segment of my listeners that we've discussed a lot on Locked On Falcons over the last month or so. Matt Ryan's coming off two of his better games that he's played in the second half of the season. He had a nice stretch in October where he was playing really well, and then since then kind of hit the skids. My expectation is Matt Ryan will be back in 2022. His contract is such that it's going to be difficult for the Falcons to move on from him next year, but with another restructure, it will be a lot more possible for the Falcons to move on from him in 2023. So I feel like next year is kind of the make or break year for Matt Ryan. If this team is better, has a better record, he's more productive than he's been this season, then, we could see Matt Ryan continuing, but it's going to be kind of a year to year situation unless we get a
Yeah.
scenario like the Lions saw last year with Matt Stafford basically saying no mas and wanting out. But I don't foresee that happening with Matt Ryan moving forward. He seems to, by all indications, enjoy playing here in Atlanta. But I guess he'll revisit that topic if he continues to get knocked around, and maybe he wants to go to another team. But I think at this point in time, the expectation for me, until we get information otherwise, that Matt Ryan will be back in 2022. But beyond that, remains a big question mark.
Who on defense should the Lions worry about? You mentioned before about the D line getting kind of chewed up last week against the 49ers. Lions have been able to run the ball pretty well. They're top 17, top 15, top 20 team in rushing for the first time in who knows how long. And the O-line's done a nice job. But what's been the problem, or maybe what's been who have been the pluses and the minuses on defense for that Falcons team,
Yeah,
Aaron?
the main two pluses have been Grady Jarrett up front and AJ Terrell in the back end. And Grady Jarrett's not having the sort of dominant season that he's had the last couple of years. Some of that's owed to scheme. Some of that's owed to the fact that the Falcons don't really have enough other options, and he's facing a lot more double teams this year. And basically teams can, in pass protection, whether it's the left guard or the right guard or whatever, have the center double team Grady Jarrett quite a bit and not have to worry about any of their other players losing one-on-ones. And that has, I think, slowed him down as a pass rusher. So I don't know if you have to be super worried about Grady Jarrett taking over this game like you probably would have been in previous years. But, the mainstay on their defense has been AJ Terrell. He's really locked down the left side of the Falcons defense. I think he still remains Pro Football Focus's highest graded cornerback in the league this year. Has been a lockdown corner when it's come to man coverage, when it's come to zone coverage. So basically his side of the field has kind of been a no-fly zone, and that's funneled the ball to the other side of the field where the Falcons have had some struggles there with Fabian Moreau, who's been decent in coverage, but tends to get penalties at inopportune times that have led to extensions of drives. And then in the red zone has struggled when it's been, do or die in those man coverage situations. The Falcons nickel cornerback situation is a dire one where they have a trio of rookies kind of rotating there with Richie Grant, their second round pick safety, their fourth round pick Darren Hall, and then fifth round pick Avery Williams. Now they brought in Sean Williams, veteran safety from the Bengals, who's been on the practice squad for most of the season. He may get into the mix, and that's going to be a tough matchup where they'll probably wind up facing Amon-Ra St. Brown this week. So there's not a whole lot of good for the Falcons defense. It's mainly Grady Jarrett and AJ Terrell, and everything else is, as I said earlier, pretty meh.
Aaron Freeman, Locked On Falcons. Matt Dery, Locked On Lions. All right, I think the Lions, if Goff is there, can win this game. I'm not necessarily predicting that, but I like the feel-goodness that's going on in Allen Park, Michigan right now at the facility. Is this the Falcons' dagger game where this is a season ender? Oh my gosh, they lost to the Lions 6-9 and it's over. Or do they stay in the playoff mix and kind of avenge last year's home loss, which was a weird game to say the least.
Well, I think they're pretty much out of the playoff mix. They would basically have to win out some way and hope that they get some tiebreakers in a major way moving forward. I think the various analytics sites put their playoff probabilities at less than 2% or whatever the case may be. So
hey, Fox said that last night had him in the hunt
okay,
in the infamous graphic.
yeah, I love those graphics where the Falcons are way down at the bottom of that in the
That's
hunt.
right.
Where,
That's right,
they got
Aaron.
to fill the screen with
At least you're
somebody.
there. At least you're there.
That's true. Fair enough. So I think, we've been sort of assuming this was going to be a win all season long, given the Falcons' success against bad teams. And, that's given what the Lions did against the Cardinals, given that the Lions have, generally, at least for the most part, been competitive against some of the better teams that they face this year. That assumption is probably not as safe. Obviously, as you mentioned, I think, Jared Goff's status is going to play a key part of that moving forward. So we'll just have to sort of see if the Falcons can take care of business. But pretty much all season long, I've been saying, okay, they'll probably get the 7 wins due to some of the softer opponents that they're going to face, and been chalking up this Lions game as one of those 7 wins. So I feel like, I feel still good that this is a favorable matchup for the Falcons, but obviously they can't take this Lions team, laying down, because I think that's probably a contributing factor to why Arizona lost last week, because they kind of went into this game expecting it to be kind of a cakewalk, and the Lions showed up and punched them directly in the mouth. So the Falcons cannot certainly assume anything, as we know, any given Sunday and whatnot.
Matt and Aaron, Locked On Lions, Locked On Falcons. It's the Thursday crossover. Thanks, Aaron.
Appreciate it, Matt. So, guys, that's going to do it here for us on today's Crossover Thursday. I want to thank Matt Dery once more for his insight and analysis on this Detroit Lions team. We'll see what happens in this Week 16 matchup between the Falcons and Lions. Tomorrow, we will be talking on Christmas Eve about something. Maybe if you guys have any listener questions that you want to get answered. I know a couple of you guys missed the deadline for yesterday's show, and I can answer a couple of those questions. We'll probably have some other topics that we can discuss. They're slipping my mind at the moment. There was something I was like, I could talk about that on Friday's episode, and right now I can't think of what it is. So stay tuned. We'll have another show tomorrow for you. If you want to send in your questions, of course, you can do so on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, on Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms. And I thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And as always, I have recommendations for what your second listen should be. And of course, you got the local shows like Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs, and obviously all those shows have a lot to going on right now. The Hawks got a big Christmas Day game in MSG, and there's a lot going on with that. Obviously, the Braves got a situation with my cousin Freddie and what his future is going to be, if he's going to be in Atlanta or elsewhere. And of course, the Bulldogs have a big playoff game coming up at the end of this month. And so you can check out all of those shows on the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including YouTube, where Locked On Braves and Locked On Bulldogs are available. And also on those same platforms, you can find the Locked On Bets podcast, where handicapping expert Lee Sterling is giving you his daily picks, his blowout specials, and his lock of the day to help get you a little bit more money in your pocket, whether that's for the holiday season, whether that's to reimburse you for all the money you spent on your gifts, or reimburse you for all the money that you spent this year on Built Bars. Lee's got you covered as far as that go, giving you those tips and tricks that can get you ahead moving forward on the Locked On Bets podcast. Find it free and available on a variety of podcast platforms. So, guys, there you have it. We'll be back tomorrow with more Falcons stuff on the Locked On Falcons podcast. What that is, I don't know quite right now, but we'll figure it out. So see you tomorrow. Until then.